Hello and welcome to episode 3 of the PhD Life Coach. What would you say if I asked you to show me your email inbox now? Would you be like, yeah, sure, have a look, it's fine, it's a few I haven't replied to, but other than that, all under control, no worries? Would you have that lurch of shame, of dread, where you're like, no, you can't look in there, there's so many messages I haven't read? How would you feel? Right now, if you looked at mine, I'd let you look. It's kind of full of notes for things that we're buying for our new house and lots of different emails from different coaches that I follow and things like that. It's kind of messy, but not as bad as it used to be when I was an academic, I have to say. So this episode is all about email, and it's one of the things that people talk about most when they're an academic, whether you're a PhD student or they're through to full professor, wherever you sit in the academic tree, we all think we have too much email. And I want to get right up front. This is not going to be a how to hack your email sort of a episode. Okay, this is not going to be a try this system, try labeling it like that, try tagging it like that kind of a session. All that stuff's good. You can look into that stuff if you want to. But really, we're going to try and get to some of the root causes of why email causes us so much pain and what we can actually do about it beyond looking for more and more solutions. It's a little bit like last week where we were talking about planners and how planners don't necessarily fix the situation. If you haven't listened to that episode, check out episode 2 about why you don't need another planner. But today, emails. So I want you to think about how you think about your emails, what thoughts you have when I ask you about your emails. Ones I hear myself come up with and ones that my clients come up with are things like, I'm drowning, it's endless, I'll never make it through all these emails, I shouldn't have to do this. That's a big one. There's too much email, I can't do my job. And there's elements of everyone wants a piece of me as well. So think about which of those thoughts you have. I bet you have at least some of them most days. I certainly did. And I want you to then think about what effect those thoughts have, because those thoughts may well be true. You may well have an endless supply of emails. It may well prevent you doing other parts of your job. We're going to think about more practical solutions later. But even if those things are true, I want you to think about what effect that has on you. So when I was still an academic, I was a full professor until August 2022. And I definitely didn't, what I would say, master the whole email thing. And I'm not sure anybody does. I would get very overwhelmed with my emails. And so thoughts about them being endless, about never being able to get through them, all those sorts of things can really make you feel overwhelmed. And when you're overwhelmed, it causes procrastination. This was something I saw in myself a lot. I would avoid doing my emails. I'd even avoid people who had sent me emails that I knew I hadn't replied to, out of this kind of overwhelm of just how many there were. And it stopped me kind of getting on and dealing with some of the ones that were there. I'm sure that's something you've experienced as well. Another thing I saw was kind of that resentment, frustration almost, that I shouldn't have to deal with all of this. This thought that I shouldn't have this many emails, it's in some way wrong, would lead to lots of frustration, resentment. And again, that didn't lead to me getting on with things. That led to me getting cross. It led to me venting. So wherever you go in a university, you will find people moaning about having too many emails. And I'm all for letting emotions out. I'm all for processing our emotions, but venting isn't necessarily processing them. Venting, where you end up feeling at least as cross, if not more cross than you started, isn't releasing that emotion. It's not processing that emotion. If anything, it's reinforcing it and making it a habitual emotion that you always feel resentful about your emails. The other thing I think that these sorts of frustration and overwhelm, even shame, can lead to is what I recently heard referred to as frantic action. So Chelsea Eidhoven, who runs the Part-Time Wellness podcast, would really recommend. Once again, it is aimed at people with ADHD, but I think there's tons of good value in there for people, no matter what your brain makeup is, whether you consider yourself neurotypical or neurodivergent. She referred to it as frantic action. And this is the sort of action that comes from a place of stress, of overwhelm, of shame, that just sort of, oh my God, I just need to get it done. And I thought that was a really, really interesting phrase for it, because sometimes it feels like these emotions generate good productivity from us, that we go and get lots of stuff done because we're feeling stressed and anxious and things. But often when it's that sort of frantic action, it doesn't feel good. And it often doesn't involve pausing and thinking, is this actually the best way of dealing with this? So it's bashing through loads and loads of emails without thinking about whether there's a way you could actually reduce the number of emails you've got, or whether there's ways that you could avoid filling up other people's. It's just, I need to get through these, bash, bash, bash. Okay. So, and that's why thinking about how we think about things is so important, because our thoughts about email generate these emotions, which then dictate our behaviors. So we are going to think about what thoughts you could have about emails that would be more helpful. But before we do, massive disclaimer. In this style of coaching, we often think of circumstances as inherently neutral, and that it's only made positive or negative by the thoughts that we have about them. And I do believe that to some extent, but I'm going to give you my get out of jail free card here. I also believe that academics, everyone at universities, have too many emails. We have tons of emails that, if we process them the way we sometimes tell ourselves, or other people tell us we have to process them, would use up portions of our day that probably would take away from other parts of our job. Okay, so this is not going to be a podcast where I say, if you just think like this about emails, you'll be able to get them all done and it'll all be fine. That's not what this is about. This is not a passive resilience sort of a podcast. That's not what I'm here for. What I'm here for, though, is to stop you making it more painful than it needs to be, and to get you into a mindset where you can accept the bits that are inevitable and actually get on with them in as pain-free way as possible, and actually change the bits that are rubbish and shouldn't be the way they are. Okay, so we're not building passive resilience here. We are just not layering on any more rubbish than we have to. So what I want you to really kind of ponder on is not just your views about emails, but what do you make it mean about you? So when you think, I've got so many emails, I'm so behind on replying to people, what do you make that mean about you as a person? My guess is there'll be a big portion of you that will make that mean that you're not doing your job very well, that you're not good at this, that you're letting people down, that maybe you're being selfish because you're prioritizing other things. We make these circumstances mean something about us, and that leads to even more difficult emotions than your kind of frustration and resentment and those sorts of things. That starts leading to things like shame, where we're judging ourselves as a person, and that makes it even harder to get on with these things. It makes it even harder to like ourselves and have good mental health. The other side is making it mean something about your institution or your sector. So I see people fall one or two ways. They either make it mean that they're not good enough and that they just need to do more and that other people are able to manage this, and if they just work harder, they'll be able to do it, those sort of things. Or they make it mean that academia is broken. I have so many emails, academia is not what it used to be, shouldn't be like this, it's all rubbish. They make it mean something about the sector. And that then leads to hopelessness and things like that, leads to anger at the changes in the sector. And again, those sorts of emotions usually only lead to venting moaning about it, and essentially becoming part of the problem. So what I want us to think about is, what do we even mean by being on top of our emails? And what thoughts could we have about our emails that make it less painful and more effective at the same time? So the first thing I want you to do is I want you to think back. If you haven't listened to my first episode yet, I want you to go back and listen to that at some point, where we talk about how to be your best supervisor, how to manage yourself the best you can. Two of the things I talk about in that are compassion and curiosity. And that's what we're going to channel while we address this problem. And I want you to think of, this as one issue. We're thinking about email as something that people find challenging, but actually the approach we're taking, you can take with anything that you find challenging in your job. So we're thinking about the problem of email. If you're finding something else difficult, you can do the same strategy. So our strategy is compassion, curiosity, and compassion starts with acceptance. It starts with the fact no one's on top of their emails. Of course they're not. Do you know anybody who's like, oh yes, I get a perfectly manageable amount of emails. It's fine, all good. No one is on top of their emails. And what that means is our definition of on top is completely stupid. Okay? If everybody's behind, we're not behind. It's just where we are. This is just how we do it. That's fine. You're not a bad academic because you haven't replied to those students. The system isn't broken because your manager sends you too many emails. We get a bunch of emails. We have thoughts about it. We do some actions. Okay? No one is on top. We don't have to make this mean anything about ourselves and our capabilities. We don't have to make this mean anything about the system being inherently broken. We can just accept that at the moment we get whatever number of emails a day, and we need to figure out a way of managing it better than we're doing at the moment. Okay? So compassion is coming at it from the point of view, accepting this is what it is, and accepting that it's totally understandable where you're at with it. It's understandable that it's difficult to go through a whole bunch of emails, usually about loads of different topics. If you're a PhD student, you probably get emails from your supervisor, maybe participants if you're doing human studies, archivists, all those sorts of things, technicians perhaps. And then you get all the emails from the university, which are meant to help you, but often just pile up in your inbox. So about the careers service and about the wellbeing service and the whatever else service that you have access to and the events that are happening and da-da-da. It's no wonder it's hard to process this stuff. There's a load of them and they're all about different things and all of them require you to think. It's not a surprise. It's okay. So some of it is that kind of compassionate thinking that, of course, this is a bit hard and that's okay. I can get some of this done. That's the next bit, is rather than thinking, I'm terrible if I don't get this all done, I'm letting these people down, is thinking, I can answer some of these. I can bash through 10 now. Let's go. I'm actually really looking forward to helping this student. Let's sort that one out. Because often when we think about email as this catch-all term, no one likes doing email. Do you like responding to a collaborator about a paper you're writing? Yeah, you probably do. Do you like answering questions from a student? Yeah, often you're like that too. Often do you like receiving emails about events? Yeah, sometimes they're interesting events. That's nice. Actually, when we look at what most of our emails are about, each of them is not that bad. It's just we look at them as email, this huge task. So when you look at it with compassion towards yourself and towards the emails, you're like, actually, those ones are okay. There's always some irritating ones. Of course there are, because we have thoughts about them too. But a whole bunch of your emails are probably parts of your job, parts of your studies that you do actually want to do. So remembering that, we're thinking with compassion all the time. And then once we're coming from that compassionate place of, it's understandable that I find this hard, but I do want to do it, so let's figure this out, we then start to move into curiosity. We start to see this as a challenge that we can try and work around, and we can try and come up with solutions for. And again, just to reiterate, this is not going to be me giving you loads of hints about hacks that you can use to process your emails faster, because the way you solve this problem isn't just by coming up with loads of new systems. Now, it might be if you have no system whatsoever with how you manage your emails. There are a few things, and I am going to mention one or two, but lots of it is about thinking about, okay, how can I nix this problem at the source? How can we actually make it so there's less emails? So starting out, first tip, know yourself. Know what elements of this you're good at, what elements of this you find more challenging. So to give you an example, one that I've always found challenging is during a meeting, I'll say to somebody, oh, I've got a cool thing. I'll send it to you after this. And I write it down. So don't come at me with your to-do lists and stuff. I write it down. I write it down. But then after the meeting, I go off and do something else. And then I never come back to that bit of my to-do list. And so I never send it. And then I feel bad. And this was something that I really struggled with for quite a while. And I would tell myself, no, you just need to make sure you do it afterwards. That kind of discipline-based approach where it's like, no, you just need to do it straight after the meeting. Just make sure you do it straight after the meeting. But discipline approaches rarely work. And I would still get distracted. I'd still wander off and do something different. And so I thought, okay, let's think about this curiously. Let's think about this from a place of compassion. If I find that difficult, I'm just going to send it in the meeting. And so now what I do, even if I'm in a one-to-one meeting, I just say, I've got a thing. Give me 2 minutes. I'm going to send it to you now. Just hold that thought. We're going in. And I send it to them straight away. And you might think, well, that's a waste of time because that person's now got to watch you send an email. And it's true. They do. And I say to them, you know, I know this means you got to just watch me send this, but trust me, this is the most efficient way of getting this done. And actually, people have been super understanding about it. And if anything, are super grateful because whilst it takes 2 minutes to watch me send this email, they would probably spend 5 minutes tomorrow going, oh, I could really do with that thing that Vicky was going to send me. She hasn't sent it to me. I wonder if I should remind her, but actually she is really busy, so I don't want to bother her, and da-da-da. Or sending an email to follow up and getting it from me then. So actually waiting 2 minutes while I do it right now and being able to check they can open it, check I've sent everything I said I would, actually works way better. And I came to that because I accepted myself and my tendencies. And instead of trying to make myself different, I went, okay, with me as I am, how could I do this better? And that was one of the ways that I could do it better. The next thing is that's know yourself. The next thing is know the issue. First thing is, how many emails do you actually get? We all talk about we get too many emails. How many do you actually get? Knowing the answer to that really helps you sort of figure out, is it objectively more than you can manage? Are you just dramaing this up in your brain? Is dramaing a word? We're going to go with it. Dramaing this up in your brain and making it into much bigger than it is? Or are there objectively loads and loads of emails? And if there are, where do they come from? What proportion of them come from where? You'll probably find you have 3 or 4 sources of a big chunk of them. You'll probably find that there's types of sources. So you might find that you've signed up for email lists. You might find there's particular people that send lots of emails, particular groups of people. And once you know those things, then you can start looking for small solutions. So one thing I found was that at different points in my academic career, I had more or fewer emails. So while I was head of education for our department, I got objectively billions. Obviously not actually objectively billions, but lots of emails. I would get 200-300 emails a day. And that's a lot to process when lots of them have got big tasks in them and things like that. At other times I had fewer, but I still in my head, at all times, I thought I got lots of emails. So knowing, have you actually got lots compared to usual is really useful. And figuring out where they come from, because if you can figure out where they come from, you've got a whole load of strategies ahead of you. So unsubscribing to particular lists. Some people are a fan of setting up rules, so they go particular folders. My one caution with that, if you're anything like me, I don't look at those folders. So I would sometimes set up folders so that a particular type of email would always go into those folders. And then I'd find those folders and remember they existed like 2 months later and be like, oh, there's a whole load of emails I haven't replied to in there. So that can work, but you then need to make sure that you remember or schedule time to go and look at those folders. One system that did work very well for me, and again, it was all connected to this thought about acceptance and not being perfect, and that was the Yesterbox system. So this came to my attention through a very good friend and colleague of mine called Emma Flint, who is an academic at Aston. And she didn't invent it, but she brought it to my attention. And Yesterbox's principles, if you Google it, you'll find all the kind of rules that go with it or whatever. But the basic principles are answer yesterday's emails. That's it. You could write a book on it, apparently. But no, just answer yesterday's emails. Because the thing with yesterday's emails is there are a fixed number of emails. So you can look and see exactly how long you're going to need to deal with all of those. Today's emails are not fixed because you don't know how many more are going to come today. So if you try and finish today with an empty inbox, it entirely depends on what happens towards the end of the day. If you look at yesterday's, you know you got 47 emails yesterday, you've got 47 emails to answer. That really helped. It also stops you getting into that kind of ping pong where if you reply immediately, they reply immediately, and it just keeps going. So Yesterbox is a system that I have found very useful. So if you know the actual issue, you can look for smaller solutions. The other way I want you to look at this, though, is to say, what's the bigger issue here? So we've said knowing ourselves, knowing the issue, but now dive in and say, what is the bigger issue here? Are you involved in too many things? So is the reason you've got too many emails because you're involved in too many different roles? Is it because the meetings you're involved with aren't efficiently running, and so loads of things are done by email rather than by discussion? Is it because there are certain people who copy you into too many messages? And if there are, why? What's the bigger issue there? So often we moan about people who copy us into too many emails, but are they copying us in because they're worried to make a decision for themselves because they're worried they'll get blamed or something like that? Are they worried that people will feel left out and that actually this is their attempt to include you? Is it that the issue isn't so much that you're copied into all of them, it's that it's not made clear what you're meant to do with it? In which case, can you have a conversation about that? Can you have a conversation with your research group, with your supervisor, with your PhD students, whatever situation you're in, about how you send and structure emails to make them more useful for each other? Because this really reminds me of a billboard I once saw. So this was quite a few years ago now. I was on the M6, I was driving, and there was a huge billboard, and I was stuck in traffic, and the poster said, to everyone else, you're traffic. Now I can't remember who it was an advert for, so it wasn't a very good advert from that perspective, but it really stuck in my head, because so often in traffic we're sat there going, oh, if all these cars got out of the way, I'd be able to get on my journey. And then, but to everybody else, you're the problem. To everybody else, you're clogging up their way. And the same's true with email. Have you ever on a Friday afternoon gone, you know what really helped my brain space is to clear my emails before the weekend. I'm going to clear my emails before the weekend. And sometimes that's deleting emails, but often it's replying to emails. And so what we're essentially doing is clearing our inbox by chucking it into other people's inboxes. Now imagine, I've got a new, very empty garden at the moment. I've moved into a new build. It's just weeds and mud, a little tiny bit of lawn coming through. Imagine if I cleared that by just throwing my weeds over the fence. I don't think my neighbours would love that very much, but that's essentially what we do with our emails. We clear our emails by chucking them into somebody else's emails, often without much thought for how we can do that effectively. So another part of this kind of compassion and curiosity is stopping and going, how can I send fewer emails? Rather than moaning about how many emails I get, how can I send fewer emails? How can I send better emails? Few things that I found really useful, trying to keep them shorter. I once got told by a colleague that my emails were too long and no one read them, which was nice. Sometimes it's good to get blunt feedback. And after that, I really made an effort to make it shorter, to make the actions really clear. Other things you can do, make sure you use the subject line effectively. So don't just leave it as read whatever the last conversation 2 weeks ago was. Change that so that it's really clear. Reattach things. So particularly PhD students, if you're sending stuff to supervisors and you're saying, just following up to see if you've done comments on my manuscript, whatever, reattach it. Don't say, have you done comments on my manuscript that I sent you last Tuesday? Because now your supervisor's got to wander off to last Tuesday. Saying, supervisors, all goes for you too. It's supervisor, you're sending something to your students. Have you read the paper I sent you or whatever? Reattach it. Make it easy for them. Have everything in one place. I've had many wonderful PhD students in my time, but I had a PhD student who was particularly good at doing this, Jo, and she would send me emails where she'd reattach the thing I needed to do. She'd remind me when the meeting was. So it was all dead subtle. It didn't sound like she wasn't saying, I'm reminding you of this. She'd say, looking forward to seeing you on Tuesday at 3 p.m, for example. So just re-emphasizing, it'll be great to go through my method section comments with you. So again, sort of emphasizing what it was we were doing so that I could definitely be prepared for it. And she'd reattach all the things that I needed. And it just meant that instead of having 10 different emails from her that kind of reminded me of the different things we might do in that meeting, one email that she'd structured out that had everything we were going to do, when we were meeting, what time, and reattached the things I needed. It reduced my email traffic and made it so much easier to be a better supervisor for her. So think about, how can you do that? If you have people who routinely send you emails in dribs and drabs, who CC in too many people, things like that, how can you have a conversation with them to try and reduce this at source? Okay. So to conclude, email is just a tool that we're using. There is probably objectively far too much of it flying around. But how we think about it really affects how we do our jobs and how well we can deal with this issue that we're all managing. If we can stay in a place of compassion for ourselves and remind ourselves the fact there's no way to do this perfectly, we're all managing within this system, and then come at it from curiosity as to, but how can I make it a little bit better? Then we're all much less likely to be drowning in our emails and focusing instead on how can we help each other swim. Thank you very much for listening, and see you next week.